Alright, howdy folks. Welcome to a video here from Squirtle Squad GLC YouTube channel. In this video, what I wanted to do is talk about retreat tools and how you can consider them for your various decks. The reason that retreat tools are so important is they let you pivot and help you set up your decks. Now, for a lot of folks, going and finding a winning deck list is an important part of the hobby. And so if that's you, I would refer you to a couple of very important resources, which are the Cardboard Warriors webpage, the primary GLC Gym Leader Challenge webpage, and the Limitless TCG webpage. And so Limitless TCG, I always have a hard time finding it, so it's actually easier for me to Google Gym Leader Challenge results on Limitless TCG and then take that link. And if you're confused why there aren't a whole lot populating there, I would also encourage you to check the filter for the set. That webpage recounts every time a new set comes out, and so you kind of have to click on a tab there and sort and filter it. Regardless, if you're looking for a deck list to borrow, that's totally fine. But if you're looking to crack one or build one yourself, that's what this video is for. And so I have here an assortment of tools that'll help you out. Now, why do you want a retreat tool at all? Well, let's say you have an active Pokemon and one on your bench, and you're trying to power up the one on your bench to get it into the active to be able to attack somebody. That's a very important part of the game, and there's a number of reasons why you might not be able to just promote the Pokemon that you want to attack if this one's knocked out. And the reason for that is cards like this. So some item cards like Metal Saucer or Aqua Patch or Dark Patch or Wondrous Patch all will add energy from your discard pile to a Pokemon in play, but it's only ever a benched Pokemon. The same concept is true with stadiums like Magma Basin that'll let you put energy from your discard pile onto that benched Pokemon, or very powerful Pokemon like Xatu. Xatu is arguably one of the most powerful Pokemon in the Psychic GLC arsenal, because it not only lets you accelerate energy, but it also lets you draw cards when you do that. And so because of that, you ultimately want a Pokemon charging up on the bench, and then you need to be able to retreat it into the active to be able to make its attack. Now, that's very convenient if you have a Pokemon like Howlucha in your deck. This one is from one of the new sets, so as of the recording of this video, Perfect Order just came out, and Howlucha is new to that set. And you'll notice very importantly here, Howlucha is a free retreater. And so your best bet is having a Pokemon with free retreat in your deck. But that's not always a great idea. One, you might be tight for your 60 cards. Two, this Pokemon might actually be knocked out and in your discard pile, or prized, even worse. Man, I hate it when they're upside down and they don't show up to work and they're just hanging out over there. But the other option is, sometimes they're just too low hit points. A lot of those free retreat Pokemon might only have 30 hit points, and so they can be a liability to an attack or to damage spread. And so often people will include a tool in their deck to try to facilitate that pivot from the active Pokemon to the benched Pokemon as part of their turn. Now, by far and away, the most common tool to do that in the Gym Leader Challenge format is Floatstone. So this is one of those older trainer cards that, if you're new to Pokemon TCG, you're going to have to go back through the archives or pick one of these up on TCG, .com to be able to pick some of them up. So this one's copyright 2015, so this card's already more than a decade old, and this isn't even the original printing, I don't believe, of Floatstone. This is by far and away the A-list or S-tier, the highest, most played retreat tool in GLC format, and the reason for that is the Pokemon this card is attached to has no retreat cost. So it's not subtracting an amount, it's multiplying whatever that amount is by 0. And so if you have this tool attached, it doesn't matter if your opponent's Pokemon is adding additional retreat, or if you're under the action of, let's say, a Galar Mine here that adds 2 stars to the retreat cost. Well, if you add 2 to a number and then multiply it by 0, it's still 0. And the same is true if your opposing Pokemon has something like a Gravity Gemstone. So both of these are additions to decks people can put in there to try to mitigate or slow down those pivots. I personally have both of these in one of my builds for a dark deck that maybe I'll feature on the channel here at some point. It's sneaky, and it kind of requires me to pin something in the active for a while. And so both of these are utilized in that. One of the things that makes doing that very challenging, again, is Floatstone, because it does set that retreat to 0 no matter what it is. This effect is different than a Howlucha that would start at 0 natively, but then it would add to 2 to it. And so, if Galar Mind's in play and you have a Howlucha, the retreat of the Howlucha is 2, whereas with a Floatstone attached, it's still 0. And so that makes this one the big baddie. The only problem with Floatstone is that it can be easily removed with anything that'll scrape that tool off. And so the most common one of those, would be a field blower. That's a very common item. And maybe I'll do a follow-up on, things that remove tools in a later video. Probably the second most common tool you'll see in the format is U-turn board. And the reason U-turn board is so powerful is that second part of the text there. It says, if this card is discarded from play, put it into your hand instead of into a discard pile. And so if it is attached to a Lunatone and that Lunatone is knocked out, I then can put this back in my hand and reattach it to somebody else to be used later. The only hiccup to that is if it's discarded from hand, not from play, that does not take into, that effect does not trigger. The only other way to get rid of this little bugger is to suck it into the Lost Zone. And in my most recent and current Psychic deck, I tech in a 1 of Lost Vacuum specifically to send this thing into the Lost Zone. The only other downside of U-turn board is you'll notice it only subtracts 1 from the retreat cost, and a lot of Pokemon obviously have retreat costs of 2, 3, or 4. And so the U-turn board, unlike the Floatstone, is insufficient to let those bigger, beefier Pokemon retreat. And so often people will put it on a Pokemon that natively has a single retreat. So that's kind of the benefit of the U-turn board there. The other, kind of B tier, and depending on the deck, so in my grass deck, I've got a lot of beefcakes for the Pokemon, and so I don't actually have a U-turn board in there because it's not big enough. It doesn't help out enough. So I have a lot of 2 and 3 retreat Pokemon, so I tech in an air balloon instead. The air balloon does have the liability of being able to be sucked away and not returned to hand like the U-turn board, but it does have the advantage of reducing the retreat cost by 2 instead of only by 1, and so that can be a big tech in. And so if you're deciding, that you want 2 retreat tools and you get the Floatstone as the obvious one, I would consider looking at which Pokemon you're going to attach either the air balloon or the U-turn board to make that decision. And depending on a deck and which Pokemon and what the retreat cost is, I think there's a valid argument for either of these two kind of backup tools. So they're both in there. We'll resume the initial format. The other one that I think gets played very specifically is the escape board. And so the escape board here is nice because, like the U-turn board, it reduces the retreat value of that Pokemon by a single value, a single energy. But in this case, it can retreat even if it is asleep or paralyzed. Now, there aren't a lot of decks that are taking advantage of the special conditions in GLC because there's a lot of other switch and gust options. But one place where it can be very useful to have that is the Stellar Wish Jirachi. And the Stellar Wish Jirachi has a very powerful ability to go look through the top 5 cards of your deck for any trainer card and that trainer card, is way better than a lot of other search. So other cards that are similar to this are the Tatsugiri for Dragon, and that only lets you find a supporter. And the other one is the Mysterious Tail Mew from the prior anniversary set. That one's also a great card, but it only lets you find items. Jirachi, in a lot of ways, is way better than those two because you can find a stadium, a trainer, a tool, or an item. And so the flexibility to go find any trainer card is really fantastic in the Jirachi. The downside, though, is if you read here, if you do that, this Pokemon is now asleep. And so that's a problem if you promote the Jirachi, use its ability, and it puts itself to sleep. Let's see, asleep that way. Confused is this way. I think sleeps that way. Maybe sleeps this way. I'd have to go check. Don't hate me for that. But once it's asleep, it's kind of stuck there in the active unless you have a scoop net or unless you have an escape rope or unless you have a Guzma or something like that. But the cool thing about the escape board is that you can attach it to your Jirachi and now you can retreat. And the other thing that's really nice about it is it's only a single retreat Jirachi. And so the way that this works is, if the Lunatone would get knocked out, you'd promote your Jirachi, you'd be able to use the Stellar Wish ability, pull a card out of the top 5, and then you'd be able to retreat it into whatever the next Pokemon you'd want to promote is. And so that makes the Escape Board Jirachi combo very unique and very powerful. With the exception of this, I don't think that there's a reason to play the escape board over these other 3 items, as it cannot be recovered automatically like the U-turn board, and it's subjective to all the kind of same tool removal. Now, there are 3 other retreat tools that I don't think I've ever seen in a Gym Leader Challenge deck, and I think that's because they're basically just not as good as your other options. So the rescue board here, much like the escape board and the U-turn board, only reduces the retreat value by a single star. Unless the Pokemon has 30 hit points or less, then it has no retreat cost. And so it's kind of a Frankenstein between the U-turn board and the float stone, but it's contingent on having very few hit points left, and it's very hard for you to control how powerful your opponent's attack is, and so that kind of makes the rescue board unreliable relative to either the U-turn board or the escape board. The other one here is the Future Booster Energy Capsule, and so this, much like the float stone, gives you no retreat cost in that. However, it has to be attached to a future Pokemon, and since there aren't a lot of future Pokemon that are getting play, there are some, but not a lot. And so that means that the Future Energy Capsule does not get as much play in the Gym Leader Challenge format. Who knows? Maybe we'll see. I mean, I think the Iron Crown has gotten some play, and there are a couple of other future Pokemon that maybe will find use. But this was really built in standard for the Iron Hands in the kind of a future deck. And unfortunately, that one hasn't, obviously that has rule box Pokemon and can't be played in Gym Leader Challenge. But so that one's still there if you can think of a cool way to use it. The other one that's come out recently, that's kind of like a float stone, and but it has one big stipulation, and that is this has to be attached to a stage 2 Pokemon. And so maybe in my big grass deck, I'm actually better off with the air balloon over the float, or over the big air balloon over the regular air balloon, because this would make my stage 2 Pokemon like Torterra or the Meganium or the ever-potent Vileplume with the item lock ability. That would give it free retreat, whereas this only reduces by 2. And so maybe there's a use for this in some decks that have a very high count of stage 2 Pokemon, but in general, I would say most of the more prominent decks in Gym Leader Challenge format are either tending to attack with that stage 2 Pokemon anyway and don't want it moved to the bench, or they're using a basic Pokemon, and so it's a relatively high prevalence of basic and stage 1 Pokemon, and so that's one of the reasons why the big air balloon doesn't see anywhere near as much play as the regular old air balloon. Now, there's one card here that I wanted to talk about that's not actually a tool card, but is very useful to think about kind of in the same context, and that is a Jet Energy. And Jet Energy is pretty awesome because, again, if you have that Pokemon on the bench, and let's say your Jirachi is asleep, you can attach that Jet Energy to your benched Lunatone, promote it to the active, and then if that Pokemon has only 1 retreat cost, you can then just discard that to put up whatever other Pokemon you want. And so in a lot of ways, Jet Energy is a really nice double switch that can get you out of a lot of really tight binds. And that can be very beneficial if you're trying to shake off, let's say a Munkidori confused your active Pokemon and you still want that Pokemon to attack but not be subject to confusion. Pop that on the benched one, promote the benched one with the effect of the Jet Energy, discard the Jet Energy, now you're unconfused, right? And so that can be a great way to get around that. It can also clear effects like poison or paralysis in a very similar way, and any of those effects that might knock out a Pokemon in the subsequent turn. So the Hisuian, I think Zoroark from Psychic that had a colorless or no energy attack, that could in principle be very intimidating just to have an automatic knockout. But again, if you place that Jet Energy, you can promote a Pokemon, and then this also is not subject in any way to how much retreat cost that Pokemon has, and it'll get around all the effects of something like a Galar Mine or a Gravity Jumpstone. And so the only downsides of the Jet Energy is that it does chew up your energy attachment for the turn, and so that's something you have to think about quite carefully before putting that into a deck and figuring out how you're going to use it. So with that being said, I think I've covered most of the retreat tools here that I can think of. I think in the Gym Leader Challenge format, there's rightfully kind of an A tier, a B tier, and a C tier, and then there's some couple of other shenanigans to be, on the lookout for from these folks. But in general, it's always very powerful to be able to use cards such as these to power up those benched Pokemon and then get them into the active spot. So hopefully you've enjoyed some of this. If so, leave a thumbs up for the channel. Always subscribe where possible. Don't feel free to drop a comment down below. And if not, hopefully you'll catch us next time to figure out what I'm thinking about to tech into my next Gym Leader Challenge deck.